Your powers are weak, old man.
You can't win, Darth. If you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine.
Hey, my More brothers, back again. And this is, I posted that little clip, screenshot of Kenneth Clark's Dark Ghetto. People are interested in it. So I'm just going to do a little reading of it as I'm going through it. And I don't think I'm going to go through the whole chapter today, but there's some pieces coming out of this that I actually want to get into the record, because people are actually interested in it. Maybe, there'll be pieces of the book, because I haven't really read the whole book. I've scanned through it, but I haven't really read the whole book, and processed it. But I think right after I finish Freedom Is Not Enough, I'll get into Dark Ghetto and mark it up, and then come back and do a further analysis of the book. Because it's a very important book. And to really understand the Moynihan reports, you got to understand two books, two very seminal books. Understand the Moynihan Report, which is Kenneth Clark's Dark Ghetto and E. Franklin Frazier's The Negro Family in the United States. Okay, if those two books, you can kind of get a feel for the Moynihan Report and understand where Moynihan was actually coming from. But without further ado, let me go ahead and spend a little time just marking up this particular chapter. Chapter is where Moynihan got the tangle of pathology from. So we're going to actually go through just maybe a little bit of the pathology of the ghetto. There's a couple of more sections I actually want to get into, but I really want to mark up the chapter before I actually get further into them. But this is just like an introduction. Okay, the dark ghetto is institutionalized pathology. It is chronic, self-perpetuating pathology. It is a futile attempt by those with power to confine that pathology so as to prevent the spread of its contagion to the larger community, which is what Moynihan was trying to say. He's trying to say that they want to correct this, not say cancer, but correct this disturbance, this crack in the culture, so it doesn't spread, so it doesn't start replicating itself outside the urban environment, and outside not only the urban environment, but also the black community into the white community. It would follow that one would find in the ghetto such symptoms of social disorganization and disease as high rates of juvenile delinquencies, venereal disease among young people, narcotic addiction, illegitimacy, homicide, and suicide. All of these forms of social pathology do thrive in the ghettos except suicide. Only in suicide statistics does Harlem fall below the norms of New York City as a whole. That's very true. At least it was previously, I think even still black people commit suicide at a much lower level than other communities. Not only is the pathology of the ghetto self-perpetuating, but one kind of pathology breeds another. In other words, it feeds upon itself. The child born in the ghetto is more likely to come into a world of broken homes and illegitimacy. And this family and social instability is conducive to delinquency, drug addiction, and criminal violence. Okay, we just saw the guy in McDonald's called by his mother and shot another guy in the face over cold fries. Neither instability nor crime can be controlled by police vigilance nor by reliance on the alleged deterring forces of legal punishment. For the individual crimes are to be understood more as symptoms of the contagious sickness of the community itself than a result of the inherent criminal or deliberate viciousness. The environment causes the despair, and these are symptoms of that despair. The emotional ill health of the dark ghetto is a continuum ranging from the anxious but normal individual to the criminally psychotic. The harmful effects of American racism on personality development and psychological balance are unmistakable. In other words, that's what he's saying. These are caused by the environment, the racism and the pressure put on these people. Still, it is one thing to show that prejudice damages individuals and another to show that the emotional illness of a particular individual has been caused by prejudice. and its social consequences. The link between the phenomenon of the dark ghetto and the individual destructiveness and withdrawal seems clear in many cases. In others, the relationship is less sharply drawn. The evidence concerning the nature and extent of individual psychosis and neurosis in the ghetto is far less available and not easy to interpret. There are comparatively few Negro or white psychiatrists in the ghetto. In other words, black folks are not sitting on psychiatrists' couches, so there's no record. And psychotherapy has not had vogue among Negroes that it has in white, middle, and upper class urban communities, in large part because the middle class is a central group in the white community and it is not in the Negro community. Wow. Okay, let's read that again. In large part because the middle class is a central group in the white community and it is not in the Negro community. In other words, the street controls, it still has a bigger influence on black folks, the black community, than the middle class and the upper middle class. And that is very true. We complain about it today, that street culture is considered Negro culture or black culture. Individual psychotherapy tends to either be restricted to those sufficiently and destructively ill enough to require the intervention of society, and here it is largely custodial in nature, or to those less seriously damaged who have the funds and the inclination to seek help for themselves. In other words, poor people don't normally wind up in shrinks. It would be, in fact, surprising to find many Negro patients receiving extensive voluntary personal treatment, though the number doubtless will rise as Negroes move into more high-status jobs. Unfortunately, it didn't, thereby gaining both the money to pay the high cost of prolonged therapy and the psychological orientation to accept it. They have the money, but they don't have the orientation. One would expect, however, given the pathology of the dark ghetto, to find a high rate of admission of Negro patients to the state and psychiatric wards. A friend of mine says, yeah, every black person in America should be sitting on some psychiatrist's couch. Harlem has the highest rate of admission to state mental hospitals of any area in New York City. The crude rate per 10,000 population is 38.5. For Harlem, compared to a mean rate for the rest of the city of 13 per 10,000. According to the Research and Planning Division of the New York City Community Mental Health Board, in 1961, 3% of the total population of New York City lived in Central Harlem, which ranked first in the rates of admission to state hospitals, contributing to 6.5% of all New York City admissions. But admission to state hospitals is only one index of mental illness. If statistics for patients in private hospitals and under home or office therapy were known, the ghetto's rates of treated illness would significantly decline in comparison with that of the white community. In other words, only the most severe that without money go to the state hospitals. There are, of course, no statistics for untreated or undiagnosed illness. In the absence of adequate and urgently needed research into the degree of actual prevalence of emotional illness in the Negro urban communities, one can do little more than speculate. Is the pathology of the dark ghetto so pervasive that mental disturbance does not stand out as clearly as it does elsewhere? That is a good question. Is the city government less observant of deviant behavior in the ghetto because it is subconsciously less concerned to protect the community from threat? Is less illness reported or even recognized as illness by ghetto families and friends? Are persons who are emotionally disturbed already institutionalized for other pathologies, drug addiction, delinquency, homicide, and hence not diagnosed or treated as ill? Does the pattern of violence in the ghetto provide an outlet for emotional release that would in another culture be turned inward into phobias and depressions? I think that's the reason that black folks don't commit suicide, because that violence is turned outward. Do ghetto residents feel too alienated from the clinics and social agencies to seek help? Do agencies tend to refer as clients those who are reachable and hence indirectly weed out prospective Negro patients? The report on urban mental illness, based on a neighborhood study conducted in the mid-Manhattan and reported publicly in 1962 concluded that 1 in 3 in the area was in some degree emotionally disturbed. What would such a study in a Negro ghetto show? Here's a piece I wanted to get to. And then this is toward the end of the chapter. We might give this a further reading later on after I kind of read through the book, but I just want to touch on some things, right? The causes of pathology. The roots of the multiple pathology in the dark ghetto are not easy to isolate. They do not lie primarily in unemployment. In fact, if all of the residents were employed, it would not materially alter the pathology of the community. And this is Clark. Clark established a whole bunch of organizations in the community. In other words, he's saying that even employment probably would not alter the culture the way we think it would. Nor do the primary roots lie in the frustrations of bad housing. There is a correlation between social pathology and housing, apparently confirming that the early hypothesis that while better housing heightens morale, it does not affect the more fundamental variables of economic status, broken homes, and lowered aspirations. That more important than merely having a job is the kind of job it is. And more important than housing, once human beings are removed from substandard housing, it is fundamental social change. Merely to move residents of a ghetto into low-income housing projects without altering the pattern of their lives, menial jobs, low income, inadequate education for their children, does not remove them from the tangle of community and community and personal pathology. Boom. That's Clark. But as matters stand now, those who have achieved success move to other neighborhoods in order to better their lives. A sustained program is still to be initiated to enhance the ghetto community as a community, and certainly some attention should be given to a marked improvement in the physical and aesthetic side of the community, until all ghettos prove unnecessary. The nation's Harlem should be made literally so attractive and beautiful that they would affirm the highest human aspirations. As long as this is not true, the physical aspects of these communities symbolize and contribute to human degradation. Wow, Clark is harsh. Got to change the environment. The culture of the ghetto must be reshaped so as to strike at the very roots of the ghetto's social malaise. Nothing short of a concerted and massive attack on the social, political, economic, and cultural roots of the pathology is required if anything more than daubing or a displacement of symptoms is to be achieved. With regard to symptom displacement, it is now obvious, for example, that successful efforts to destroy the fighting gangs of Harlem merely resulted in an earlier and fuller flowering of the far more pernicious drug and hustler culture. Wow, man, can you say crack era? Pyrrhic victories of this kind are the fruits of problem solving rather than an ego and culture building approach to individual and social pathology. In the development of remedial stratagems, even if the major concern is the elimination of juvenile delinquency rather than the building of a better life for the people of the ghetto, stress on the latter is more likely to accomplish desired ends than too narrow concern with the problem, be it homicide, gang fighting, burglary, drug use, or unwed mothers. To deal with the social pathology of adult crime in the ghetto, the pathologies of juvenile delinquency and drug addiction must be handled first. You got to start with the kids. For the typical adult criminal is likely to have evolved from a juvenile delinquent, and there is evidence that such crimes as robbery, mugging, and burglary are the direct result of an expensive drug habit. And behind and beneath all of these crimes in the ghetto is the specter of unemployment, broken families, and poor education. They say the same thing in the Kerner Commission. The rise in venereal disease and illegitimacy has its source in large measure to the despair of the ghetto's young people, who seek gratification wherever they can find it as an escape from the harsh realities of the many forms of racial rejection. Wow, Dr. Clark is harsh. To explain all criminal activity, drug addiction, and other signs of personal instability solely in terms of poverty or the racial exploitation of the ghetto is, of course, a serious error, as the evidence of white-collar crimes and increasing incidents of criminal activity among young people and adults in the more privileged communities indicate. In other words, when these people move out of the ghetto, you haven't changed the culture, it just turns into a different kind of crime. There is a tendency toward pathology in the gilded suburban ghetto too. Wow. Suburban ghetto. Wow. An emptiness reflecting a futile struggle to find substance and worth through the concretes of things and possessions, in a struggle for affirmation and status. A homogeneous, antiseptic environment is sought, artificially isolating segments of the population in patterns of sameness, the same income level and same size plot, the same neatly painted ranch houses, but even more confining, the same color of people, the same ethnic and religious background, the same age group, young couples with children, the same juvenile activities, but ballet, piano, or the Little League, and the same kind of adult parties. And in this sameness, the possibility of the richness of life that can only be found in variety and individuality is negated. The residents of the gilded ghetto may escape by acceptance of conformity, by the deadly ritual of alcoholism, by absorption in work, or in the artificial transitory excitement of illicit affairs. I'm about cheating on one's wife. The fact of the absent father in the city's ghettos is well known, but there is a strong evidence that many homes are broken even more insidiously in America's gilded ghettos. Damn, Dr. Clark. The suburban pressures caused by the contrast between an apparently happy material life and a pervasive unhappiness or emptiness lead to a damning kind of personal entrapment. Such persons, unlike the lower class ghetto members, rarely seek to relieve their frustrations in overt violence against others, but succumb to rather their fate. Why then would members of the city's ghetto seek to embrace a pathology of the suburb in exchange for their own? Because middle class culture, whatever its frustrations, still remains the norm for personal achievement of the good life. To deny the Negro the right to exchange lower class suffering for middle class suffering on the grounds in certain ways defensible. That good life is not so good after all, is to make for a group the kind of moral decisions each individual has the right to make for himself, whether he choose well or ill. It will be psychologically naive and even cruel to ask the oppressed to transform the values of American culture. Before they can be motivated to try, they need to experience those values for themselves with all the satisfactions and all the frustrations and anxieties. The relationship between individual pathology and permeating social pathology is much greater and clearer in the urban ghetto than at present appears to be in the more privileged communities. This suggests the hypothesis that criminal behavior among individuals from many of the more protected and privileged backgrounds might reflect a more severe personal instability. I don't know about that. While the identical pattern of criminal behavior from an individual who comes out of the pathology of the ghetto may merely reflect the individual's responsiveness and socialization within an oppressing antisocial system. Very true. They are different. The criminal from the privileged background could reflect a more severe problem with an inability to be socialized, while the criminal who comes out of the ghetto reflects, however perversely, his responsiveness to social pressures and controls. One cannot push such speculation too far, however, for the lack of parental controls. The social schizophrenia and emptiness of much of the suburban life may be found to be relevant in the formation of criminal antisocial behavior, as are the oppressive conditions in the slums, which is probably why you get a lot of middle class and upper middle class black people actually gravitating to hood culture. We got a little bit more The problem of controlling crime in the ghetto is primarily one of changing the conditions which tend to breed widespread violence rather than one of reforming the individual criminal. You got to change the environment. I don't see why people don't get that. An apt analogy here may be to compare ghetto pathology to an epidemic. To prevent epidemics, necessary public health and sanitation measures are taken. One does not attempt to control the epidemic through the impossible task of trying to cure individuals. Very true. Change the environment. Yet the tendency has been, in terms of ghetto crimes, to concentrate on imprisonment of individuals rather than to seek and destroy the community roots of crime itself. The environment causes crimes, not the people. It is important to understand how a community's social pathology infects individuals. Not all persons react to pervasive pathology by resorting to antisocial criminal behavior. It is not known with enough precision why one individual reacts in overtly destructive ways and another in more passive, accepting ways. One has to accept the fact that under the best social conditions man can devise, some persons will probably be criminal, some will be indigent and seek to exploit others, some will be passive, withdrawn or lazy for reasons no one fully understands. Some possible reasons are distorted familial relations, inadequate physical constitution, defective nervous system, and a complexity of other factors that are not primarily related to community pathology. The present lack of scientific understanding cannot, however, be used to justify continuing social oppression. It is clear, moreover, that the continued existence of social pathology could be cured increases the proportion of human casualties. In other words, what Doc is saying, that, and he keeps saying that, if you want to get rid of the ghetto culture, the ghetto pathology, you got to change the environment. They found that out in not the Morning Report, but the Kerner Commission. You take them out of the ghetto, okay, will some of the culture still ride with them? Yeah, as far as out of wedlock births, promiscuousness, white collar crimes, yes. But the thing is, what you see in the ghetto is basically an outgrowth of the culture and the environment together. That's how come you see the same crimes and the same attitudes and the same kind of crimes in the same place. Okay, you haven't changed the environment. You haven't changed the environment. If you move the ghetto chick or the baby mama and give her, that's how come they came up with Section 8, move her out of the neighborhood, move out of the ghetto, put her into a middle class neighborhood. Yeah, she's gonna have some ghetto culture, but the thing is, over time, that's gonna go away, and her kids are gonna get socialized differently. And her kids may be a little bit ghetto, but guess what? They go to school, white kids, they have to adhere to what white norms or European norms, and eventually they grow out of that shit. They go on to do something else. I've seen it because, hell, I'm one of those kids. Okay? I'm one of those kids. You're surrounded where you have to fight every day and people have to steal and you're poor and that's what you're surrounded by. Yeah, but they put you on the bus, they send you out to the school by the beach around different kind of kids, different kind of norms. It's going to change your outlook, change the way you talk, change the way you carry yourself. When we moved out of the neighborhood into a middle class neighborhood, all the fights and all the other kind of bullshit that would normally go on stopped. The color of people were the same, but the surroundings were different. There's ways you can change this stuff, that you can change some of the more detrimental things as far as surroundings. The thing is like Clark was saying, there's other things you have to do to actually change the culture. You move them out, they get more money, they exhibit the same kind of culture, but it's in a different way. When you put them in a different environment, then the culture is going to be expressed a different way. That's what Clark was saying. But anyway, we're going to have to go through this in more detail. He's pretty harsh, but social pathology or the tangle of pathology, which, I am going to clip off I am going to clip out and I am going to save, because that's where it's from. And he's right. He's right. Merely by moving them out of their environment doesn't necessarily cure the whole tangle of social pathology. It's not. But for right now, that's all I got for this one. How many? We're in, about 20 minutes in, 30 minutes in. We'll cut it off here. I may go back and do a little bit more, but I think that, that pretty much gives you the overview of where this is coming from. There's stuff we go through, stats and about different things, crime and all that kind of stuff. I may go back through that, but right now, this is just to whet your appetite. There's other stuff. I'll come back and pick up some of the stuff that I left out on another one. But right now, I'm just going to cut it off right here. So this is BGS out, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.